So, James, why a book about Warren Zevon? Why Warren Zevon as a subject?
Well, that's just really threefold for me. The first thing is, as a writer, writers come to Warren because, as I say in my introduction, his songs are like short stories. They're mini dramas, mini plays. Definitely, I like to look at it as chapters in a great American novel, and that novel being his life, which is why I call the subtitle of Accidentally Like a Martyr is The Tortured Art of Warren Zevon. His life, all the travails, all the ups and downs, a lot of the downs, are written about with great trust and great honesty. And so there's where the art comes in, and that's where the writers are attracted to, whether it be all of the writer friends of his, Stephen King and Carl Hiaasen, Ross MacDonald, Mitch Albom, Hunter S. Thompson before he passed. These are people who really revered Warren and came to him and would write him. Paul Muldoon, the Irish Pulitzer Prize-winning poet who wrote a couple of songs with Warren, who I interviewed for the book, most famously My Rides Here, which I dedicated an essay to, told me that he met Warren because he would write people and say, listen to Warren Zevon. You should listen to this. He would write other poets and writers and say, this is inspiring stuff. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the more obvious one, and it's less personal and selfish. And that is, I look at this book as a crusade, as a sort of a man crying out in the wilderness, if I could be really dramatic, or Warren here, and bringing a new generation, or really any generation, to know about Warren. Warren Zevon music, and I like to call it in the book the Warren Zevon Corner, is not packed with people. So there's a specific kind of fan, and those people care deeply about his work, and they can't wait to share it. And that's how I kind of approached this book, how I attacked it. And I think that people just need to know that Warren existed. And I know it seems like a dramatic thing again, but there is, when I was working on this book, what are you working on? Oh, Warren Zevon. Who's that? Werewolves of London. Oh, yeah, Werewolves of London. Aside from that, they know his songs from other artists, Linda Ronstadt, most famously, but they don't know Warren. So as long as they could know him, know that he exists, that he was a great artist, and he inspired writers and other musicians like Bruce Springsteen, Tom Petty, Jackson Browne, and now the new band Dawes, and I interviewed Taylor Goldsmith for the book, my friend Adam Duritz, who I do a podcast with from Counting Crows. All were inspired in many ways at the very beginning from Warren's work, and then he continues to inform their work. So I thought a book dedicated to that needed to be written, so I wrote it. My friend George Plaskides, professor, wrote a straight biography. This is not a straight biography. It's a series of essays. But his life, his art, hopefully, that was my aim and my theme for the book, or a thesis, for lack of a better term, was to get to the heart of the music and the man. So it's a portrait of an artist as opposed to a biography. As I said before, he lived his art, so that comes out in the book, I hope. That was my hope, an aim, if you will.
You mentioned the format of the book, the essay format. This book isn't a straight biography. It's not a critique, musical criticism. It's not a retrospective. It's kind of a hybrid of all those things. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I dedicate 9 essays for 9 songs, and 3 specific albums that I thought were seminal to his canon. Excitable Boy made him famous. Werewolves of London's on there. And arguably his finest work. I'm more drawn to the first one, but Sentimental Hygiene, which is one of my favorite albums of the 1980s, and I think his one true rock and roll album that he did entirely with REM as his backing band. That was his comeback album, the one that really, I believe, saved his life. And then The Wind, an album written by a dying man about death, about what it's like to face mortality. Here's a guy who wrote, tons and tons of songs about death throughout his entire career. And that, again, is what the draw is for a writer. Warren often said, I don't write about the normal pop music things. So I kind of get ostracized for that. Or I don't get the same accolades, say, as the Eagles, some of his contemporaries, Linda Ronstadt, Jackson Browne, Neil Young, Bruce Springsteen. But he also said something very smart. and that I agree with. He said, how come you could write a novel? How come you can make a movie about any subject? But God forbid you write a song, about a rogue shark, or, or a madman that travels around the underground of New York, like Taxi Driver is where I'm going for there. Scorsese was a big fan of Warren as well, and Warren loved his work, dedicated quite a few songs to him. So he didn't write about the normal subjects, and it comes out in the songs. It makes them eminently more interesting. It makes the characters more vivid. It makes the authenticity of the expression more important. So I decided to go in essay form to get inside those songs, to dissect them, to deconstruct them in a fun way. And I don't have all the songs. Someone is going to read the book and go, how come blah, blah, blah is not in here? But what I did was, if I write about a specific essay, and I dedicated the essays not only to songs, but for portions of his life, whether his relationship to women, his relationship to his parents, which was very, very Freudian, extremely informative to his work and his life, his relationship to his children, his relationship to alcohol, which was a huge part of, it's a major shadow, it's a major theme of his work. And then, of course, The Wind, him writing about death and then facing it, and then having the wherewithal, the guts, and the passion to spend the last months on Earth writing about what it's like to face mortality. So I thought the essay form was the best way to do it. Plus, it was a lot of fun. I got to say, it was a different way for me to write. My last book, Shout It Out Loud, the story of Kiss's Destroyer and the making of American Icon, was more like a history book. I went back to the 70s, the recording aspect of it, the band, the period, the zeitgeist. And here, it's more internal. I go behind the eyes, inside the brain if I could, sort of mining the soul of the artist. So in that sense, it is a portrait of an artist, but the songs are so vivid, man. They're just so filled with great subtext and metaphor. You can't help but embrace it. And you can't help but want to write it in essay form. It's not something you could just do, hey, he went here, he did this, he wrote about it. He went here, he did this, he wrote about it. He lived it, And so the essay form I thought was the best way to express that. I hope people dig it. Now, I definitely had the most fun writing in that style.
James, in your books, you're known for inventing a term or a phrase in order to concisely name the world that the artist has built and inhabited. In Accidentally Like a Martyr, that term is the Zevon Corner. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was just sort of a thing I made up for fun. When I was in college, I did this thing called Chaos in Motion, and it was these one-line things that I would write for fun. But really, it was to impress girls. But it was a way for me to it's kind of like tweeting today. I made sure it was only 1 or 2 lines, not like a haiku, but it had to stay within a structure to get something across. I remember one of the things, and I don't even know why. I mean, I know why because I loved him, but one of the ones that always stuck out, and I put in my introduction, is more people should listen to Warren Zevon. So I thought, I use it in the introduction. I only use it once otherwise in the book. In the Kiss book, I used it as the act, capital T, capital A. Some people loved it, some people didn't, but that was my way of saying Kiss created this thing and then they formed themselves into it, which is brilliant. Warren was very much the same. He lived his life, like I said, in forms. When he was in a duet, he dressed, his name was Lime. It's Bell and Lime, so he would dress in lime all the time. Everywhere he went, he would dress always lime, shoes. Then he went through a period where he called himself Sandy, and he dressed in light blue. And then he dressed just in black. And then he went through this period where everything had to be gray. It's weird. He had a persona as well. But the reason why I only bring it up in the introduction is I say something, and I mentioned it before when we started, is that Zevon, I wouldn't call it a cult, but he has a specific type of listener. Somebody who's literate, who reads, who understands the references, who dives deep into the song, who has a sense of humor. You have to have a sense of humor to really embrace Warren. He took little Susie to the junior prom and he raped her and killed her, and then he took her home and then he dug up her grave 10 years later and built a cage with her bones. I mean, this is not, and then the background is doo-wah, doo-wah, This is not normal fare. So the Zevon Corner is a place where all the dark stuff, all the stuff you're afraid to say when the lights are on, you haven't had a few, that you're among strangers, that you're afraid to say, Warren says, He goes there, man, and he has that voice. So when you go into when you shine a light, as I say, in the Zevon corner, you're getting something out of it. It's a rewarding experience. If I get nothing across when I do these interviews for the book, I want to say that the one thing about Warren is, as J.D. Souther, his friend and a great songwriter, his fellow classicist, he would call him, both of them classically, if not trained, they love the style and the form. He said, Warren, he was the ultimate outsider. He did not give you the same forms. He was a full meal. You don't go and eat a big pre-meal when you're going to a really great restaurant. You can't listen to all the other noise in the world. You give yourself over totally to Zevon when you're listening to him. And that's why people are very protective of him. I've noticed quite a bit. We started a Facebook page for the book. And I've already noticed all these little subgroups on Facebook and other places that they just celebrate every little line, And that stuff inspires me as a writer of nonfiction, is to find those people, find out why the hell these people feel this way about this guy. I mean, I get it, but the idea is to make the reader get it.
You talk about his popularity or lack thereof. He did have some success with Werewolves of London and songs that were recorded by other artists like Linda Ronstadt. But he never had that huge worldwide acclaim or fame. Instead, it was more of like a rabid little cult following. Did he encourage that? Did he cultivate that?
I don't think he did, because I from my interviews specifically with Jordan, his son, who said he would sit, especially in the later years of the 90s when he was touring, in a car with an acoustic guitar. I saw a lot of those tours, just him and the grand piano or acoustic guitar, 12-string, by himself or with Timothy B. Schmidt from the Eagles or a couple of people accompanying him. Mostly he's just very stripped down. His last 3 or 4 records he recorded in his home because he just couldn't afford it, and record companies didn't want to give him money because he wasn't selling enough numbers. He would have preferred to be a bigger rock star. But he didn't. He had kind of a love-hate relationship with a lot of people that he worked with, like the Don Henleys and the Jackson Browns and the Waddy Wachtells and everybody. But he didn't really aspire to be. He didn't feel like he needed to be this person. But I think he did want to be. I mean, why wouldn't you? Perry Como, Perry Farrell used to say, same person. I don't care if you're cutting yourself up with glass or you're singing with a dinner jacket on. It's the same job. You're trying to get as many people as possible to watch you so they pay your bills. He called and he loved his fans, but he called them the customers. Got to take care of the customers. So he knew it was a business. This is a guy who had already had an amazing career that he would have been proud of. Anyone would have been proud of. He wrote jingles for Boone Farms and other things, in his early 20s. He got a B-side, Like the Seasons, was the B-side to the Turtles' biggest hit, Happy Together. Kept him alive. He got a song on the Midnight Cowboy soundtrack. He was the band leader for the Everly Brothers in their last tours. He played on one of their records. He was a musical producer for Phil Everly's TV show. This is a guy, before he became even as famous as he did, had already built a good, solid career as a musician and a working songwriter. He knew what it was like to be famous and not famous. So I don't think he did cultivate his sort of outsider status. I don't think he could help it, which speaks to the authenticity of Warren. And again, J.D. Souther said, we were the outsiders. We lived in Beechwood Canyon when everyone was in Laurel Canyon. He had a cheap apartment, in South L.A. when everybody else was living up in the mountains in these big mansions. He was peripatetic. He was all over the place, as far as mercurial is a good word. So it was hard to pin him down. And he had a very serious drinking problem and, drug abuse problem. And those things kept him from staying on the straight and narrow. And let's face it, his biggest hit was really not a mistake. They knew how good Werewolves of London was. They knew how clever those lyrics were. They knew that "Ow" was going to be a great chorus. And as Waddy said, we made it serious. We didn't play them for fools. He's not camping that up. He's singing it like he's really telling you about this thing mutilating little old ladies late last night. He's serious about that. He put himself, as I said before, into these characters. But that song, like Short People by Randy Newman, another cerebral, great songwriter, which, by the way, Waddy Wachtel plays on both those songs, both were their biggest hits. I mean, Randy's canon is, as you know, just one of the more in-depth, deep, incredibly structured songwriting of the 20th century. But his most famous song is Short People, except for the one he did for the cartoon, which is another one. And then Warren's biggest hit is Werewolves of London. So he was a rock star. He said, it wasn't that I was a rock star. It's like somebody got off the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at the wrong spot, and I happened to be there, and they sang "Ahoo," and then they got back on the ride and went to the rest of the park. And I think that's a great way to look at it. He had his moment, but how do you don't cultivate something that was it's like a, what do you call one of those kind of songs? Kind of I forget the word, but it's not the kind of thing a serious songwriter does. But he never abandoned it. He always said, why would I not play Werewolves? Even at the end, I have to play Werewolves. People love Werewolves. I love it. So he never cheapened the song, even when he first recorded it. But if you have a hit like that and it's not exactly what you're doing the rest of your career, how do you get there again? When a mistake happens, how do you make that mistake twice? And to his credit, he never tried. There was no, Dracula on parade. There was none of that. He had his shot. He had his, monster mash, and he stayed with it.
Numerous people you speak with in the book describe Warren as an artist or refer to his artistry. Why should we consider Warren an artist? Well, why is he not simply a musician or a songwriter?
Right. Listen, Oscar Wilde, who I know we both love, often said that I save my art for my life and my work for my work. You live the life and then you write about it. I'm not saying that other artists don't. They absolutely do. No writer, I don't care if you're Kerouac writing On the Road or Fitzgerald, writing about his inability to equate commerce with station in America, Hemingway's fascination with war, Hunter Thompson's fascination and complete immersion into the drug culture. That doesn't, of course it informs you as a writer and as a songwriter. But there's something about Warren Zevon where he lived these things. He often said, I don't like to write about anything I haven't experienced. When he went into the detox center and wrote Detox Mansion on Last Breath Farm. So again, if you're a writer, you're loving that. He went there. He dried out and he wrote about it. When he writes about being stuck in the Hollywood Hawaiian Hotel, this dump in Los Angeles, but he puts that wonderful humor and subtext in it. He doesn't let go of that. He doesn't shy away. I say he is a performance artist. As I said before, he always had these personas. He had a certain persona, the excitable boy, and they played it up in many tours, bringing him out in handcuffs, or carrying him out in a stretcher, kind of thing. But he meant it. He lived that life. There were times when Warren would disappear for days. They didn't know where the hell he was. He went on these binge blackouts, and he was never proud of it. He said, I didn't want to die a coward's death. But he lived those things. So I think that makes him as much an artist as anything else. And that's why I wanted the word art to be in there and not just songs or music. Because I see him as a living embodiment of the art. The music is the man, and the man is the artist, and those things conflate. And there's no separating them. And coming off doing a book about Kiss, which was all fabrication in a way, bravado, that's not the case with Warren. Warren, if anything, had a sense of paranoia and self-deprecation that was hard to find in other rock stars. And maybe that's the other reason why he wasn't overtly appealing. Because he saw the blemishes, man. He saw, and I don't even know, and I'm not going to be a junior psychiatrist, although I do, in the book, carve into his childhood. His father being a gangster, Jewish gangster, his mother being a Mormon, and getting his first piano from his father that he won in one of those gambling binges, and how he always looked at his father as this incredible figure, but also sad. He had to lie for the man. He was afraid for his life a lot of times, or afraid for other people around. He knew what he was dealing with. So these things are in there, but not to be a junior psychologist or anything, but I think those songs have a strong connection to his personality that he didn't let go. And again, I'm a better person for having heard those songs. I just hope I can express it the way, I can't even really express it now. I hope that the book expresses it well to get people to understand how deep a dive Zevon goes in these songs.
We can't talk about this book without talking about Warren's substance abuse. There are lots of stories about rock and roll and pop stars being alcoholics, but
Yes.
Warren doesn't seem to fit into that mayhem, debauchery kind of alcoholism. It's almost a more romantic, classic story of the tortured artist like Fitzgerald or Van Gogh or Hemingway, someone like that. How did his substance abuse affect his music and his relationships?
Oh, everything. It affects everything. There's no question about it. You know, I make the joke. It's not a joke, but I comment that it's not the elephant in the room. It's the blue whale in the room, because that's the largest mammal on Earth. You can't ignore it. I mean, it informed his work to the point where he told Paul Nelson, his good friend and a great writer who wrote the quintessential, I believe, not only about Warren Zevon, but portrait of a rock star in stasis, in crisis. The Crack Up and Resurrection of Warren Zevon, which he based on the Crack Up, which was an essay that Fitzgerald wrote when he was out in L.A. and starting to snap. And Nelson wrote beautifully about Warren's fight with alcoholism and how they had this intervention. And I'm very proud of the fact that I interviewed every living member that was in on that intervention. And I'll let the book speak for itself. And their stories, I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in any of these interviews. I mean, these stories were, people loved Warren, and they knew that the alcohol had affected him. And he started drinking when he was a preteen. His love of classical music starts very early in middle school, and it parallels his love of alcohol. And I don't think you could separate the two of those either. He was discovered by Robert Kraft, a composer and a classical music critic who was working on musical pieces with the 80-year-old Igor Stravinsky in the later part of his life in Southern California by San Diego. And the music teacher in his middle school, Warren's music teacher, hooked him up with Kraft. And they would spend afternoons sitting around and reading and critiquing other classical pieces. And he would drink vodka with Stravinsky. And, he was 12, 13. And Kraft writes in his memoirs, which I have in the book, in his diaries, this kid's amazing. He's not only precocious, but he asks the right questions. He seems to understand what questions to ask. He understands why the music is dense, why it has purpose, why it's classical. He understood why Stravinsky stood apart. He was sort of his own rock star, Stravinsky. I learned from you about how much Stravinsky shocked and appalled, the Paris Literate and all the, with his Rite of Spring. People, there were riots going on. And Zevon understood that. He understood the power of that music. He understood the provocative nature of it. And Stravinsky, he said, he never denied it. He didn't want to overblow it. But he said that Stravinsky did impress upon him the strength of the composer. And he always saw himself as a 19th century composer with the baton and the wild hair and writing these symphonies. And he worked on one for his whole life. And I saw the pages, and there's a wonderful photograph taken by Susan Jordan Zevon's girlfriend, wonderful photographer, in the book of Warren's symphony that he had worked on through most of the 70s and 80s. But the reason why I bring this up in the coupling of the alcoholism is that he was tortured by the fact that he could have been, or thought he would have been, a great composer if it would have been another time. He always thought of himself as sort of atavistic, from another time, sort of this ancient character, And Stravinsky was able to be sort of like a father figure in that way. So was Ross MacDonald. So were some of the great writers that he loved, the noir writers, the Raymond Chandlers and the H.L. Menckens, the Dashiell Hammetts. He saw himself as these characters, these deep kind of characters. And they're all hard-drinking, rough-and-tumble guys, It was part of the machoism, the machismo of it. It was part of his father's life as a gambler, as a criminal, really, as a really a gangster in the greatest sense of it. Somebody who really, with the slick suits, and the hats and the secret words to get in the back rooms, to get into the speakeasies. Warren loved that stuff, and his songs drip of that. And that's the stuff that all is part of the alcoholism. But of course, as Jackson Browne says, after a while, you wonder, what punch bowl did this guy piss in? What door did he knock down? What hotel room did he smash up and leave? What bill did he have to pay? And that's why I love, and I dedicate my first essay to it, and it's my favorite Zevon song, one of my favorites, but Desperados Under the Eaves. You know, he uses the word desperados instead of the criminal. He's desperate, someone without hope. And then he's under the eaves, the eave of the hat, or the eaves of the hotel. And he's sitting in there, isolated. And he writes, and he sings, "If California slides into the ocean." So he's talking about the entire left side of the continent, just like the mystics and statistics say it will. I predict this motel will be standing until I pay my bill. And in a way, it's a joke about, shit, I don't have any money to pay this bill, and I know if everything falls apart, they're still going to ask me for the money at the end of the day. But that's a song about alcoholism. You got to pay that bill. It always comes to pay when you live a life of being on the edge. And he had an uncle named Warren who died young and apparently was a drinker. And he always saw himself as sort of, he would joke with people and say, "That's okay, don't worry about me. I'm torturing myself. My penance is I'm killing myself from drinking, an entire bottle of Stoli's vodka. Every day. Every day." His wife, Crystal, would run around and get him. First time George Gould, who I interviewed for the book, who was his aide de camp and his stage manager from 78 to 83 during the Halcyon days. First time before he even met Warren, he saw Crystal running around about 4 a.m. around the lobby of some hotel somewhere. "What are you doing?" "I'm looking to see if there's a bar open for Warren." So there's a darkness in there. He used the alcoholism, but it got to the point where he eventually told his friend and writer Ross MacDonald, "I'm not sure I can write unless I have the alcohol." And then MacDonald told him rightfully, it's in spite of the drinking that you're writing these beautiful songs. But I think deep down he never really believed that, and I'll tell you why. Because when he was doing The Wind, the brilliant album about, as I said before, his mortality and dying, he started to drink again. And he told Bridget Barr, his personal assistant, who gave me a really long-form interviews and was very emotional about it. She had to keep it from the family and the friends because he felt very proudly that he kicked alcohol in the early 90s. That he stood up and he put a press release out saying, "I'm kicking this. I'm not going to die a coward's death." But when he was dying of cancer, he seemed to find comfort in that, I think. It took him back to his middle school days. And it's a sad, deep story, but it's a great story of an artist battling with that, with not only his demons and his vices, but the muse, That's what we're always searching for as artists, right? Is that, what the hell inspires us?
I guess it was late 2002 or early 2003 that Warren finds out he's dying, and he'll die fairly young. Was there a big change in his music at that time, or how big of a change was it in his life in general?
Well, it's funny you said, because it didn't change at all. He went back to his strengths. Right before that, he did My Rides Here, which was a series of songs with writers. I mentioned before, Carl Hyacin, Mitch Albom. He wrote a song with Hunter Thompson, Larry Klein, who worked with and was Joni Mitchell's lover for years. He did a series of these songs with writers, and he told Jorge Calderon, his really good friend from the early 70s, and a guy who wrote, I think, 16, 17, 18 songs with Warren throughout his life. He called up Jorge before he got his diagnosis and said, "We got to do a record, just me and you. Let's get down." Jorge and Warren would write songs across from each other, like Mr. Bad Example. I'm going to write a line, you may write a line. I'm going to write a line, you write a line. Let's make each other laugh. They'd be rolling around on the floor. They used to call where they'd get on the seat, "Let's go on the Davenport of Despair. Let's go on the couch of pain and write our songs." Because, they had to come up with the next line. They would challenge each other. Make it better. Make that a better line. When he was diagnosed, he called Jorge. And Jorge said, and let me say, Jorge Calderon really is one of everybody was so great that I interviewed. People who were close to him. But Jorge, his remembrances of getting Warren through that album. And as Jordan said, there is no wind without Jorge. Through all the pills and all the gnashing of teeth and the alcohol and the disappearing and the doing the Letterman show for the last time and performing 3 songs, months before he was dying, barely shuffling his bones onto the piano stool. Really riveting stuff. Jorge got him through that, and he embraced that whole thing. He kept saying, sitting across from Jorge writing the songs makes me forget I'm in the moment. Isn't that what we're supposed to be as artists? We're supposed to be in the moment, right? I can't think about this grandiose, I'm going to die. So I'm going to stay in the moment and write the songs. So he went back to the thing that made him whole, writing those songs and not blinking. He was not an avoidance artist. I say it again. He would not blink at these subjects. And he does it in the most profound way with The Wind. And Jorge is there with him every step of the way, writing the songs with him, doing Spanish choruses to songs, getting these people like Springsteen, and Tom Petty, and Jackson Brown, and David Lindley, and Ry Cooder. The list is long. Billy Bob Thornton. They're coming from everywhere to record with Warren one last time. And Jorge's right in the middle of this, man. He's writing these songs. So Warren never changed from the outside. He always made sure that he changed internally in the sense where he made his own luck. He was obsessed with luck. I write about in Bad Luck Streak and Dancing School, which I dedicate an essay to. And of course, something like Laura's Guns and Money. I'm an innocent bystander. Somehow I got stuck between a rock. Somehow I got stuck. Like accidentally, like a martyr. How does one accidentally become a martyr? He constantly wrote about luck. He would open 10, 12 Mountain Dew cans when he was sober to get to the lucky one. He would put on a shirt and go, this ain't lucky. He wouldn't get in a car. He never smoked a cigarette if it had the word cancer on it, ironically. He told David Letterman when he was dying, he said, being afraid of doctors, which he was, he didn't go to the doctor for 20 years, and so they didn't diagnose him until it was way too late. He said that was one of those phobias that didn't pay off. That stuff constantly was in his head. So he was dealing with luck. So here he's beset with this, incredible gut punch, chin shot, and he comes back. And as he writes in Boom Boom Mancini, one of his great songs from the 80s, some have the moves and the right combinations, but if you can't take the punches, it don't mean a thing. I love that line, and I've used it many times in my columns, and I think Warren really believed that. So the wind was a way for him to face down. That's one of those times when he wasn't fucking around, Yeah.
In the essay for Bad Luck Streak and Dancing School, you write about the influence that classical music had on Warren, and also the time he spent with the composer Igor Stravinsky. Could you go into that a little bit and speak about how he used those classical influences in his own songwriting?
Well, all of the people that I spoke to, the really musical people, like Waddy Wachtel, the great studio and touring cat, is now the band leader for Stevie Nicks, touring the world. I met up with Waddy backstage at one of the Stevie shows here in New York last spring. David Landau, great guitar player, played with many people. He was the band leader for a couple of Zevon tours. His brother John is a manager of Bruce Springsteen. Quite a few different people. J.D. Souther, who was classically trained. They all said that Warren used a deeper palette musically. He was a piano player first. He wasn't classically trained. He wasn't a prodigy, he would joke. He understood it instinctually, and then he connected to classical music first, before rock and roll, before folk. And then, of course, his time with Stravinsky, as I mentioned before, was informed this. But I think that he constantly went for those, instead of the usual 3, 5, whatever he went with the deeper bass notes to the regular chords. And I interviewed Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, and he's famous for this years ago, of using different bass notes under the chords to just give it a different pattern. And I remember you telling me and informing me, and you helped me with this book as well, what Bob Ezrin did for Kiss, how he used in the ballad Beth, 6 or 7 different classical changes that no one would use. Warren did that quite a bit, especially in his ballads. And if you listen to the French Inhaler or Accidentally Like a Martyr or Genius later in his career, he's using not only string arrangements, which he wrote out meticulously by hand. He loved to do that. But he just, in his structured songs, Jackson Browne says, it was in the songs, the style of the writing. So, you taught me that. I mean, you showed me. We would play the songs and you'd say, see what he's doing there? That's not what you would do. You do this. 9 times out of 10, someone would do this. There's a great story, and I recount it in the book. There's a great story when Warren was the band leader, or he was, I guess, the band leader, but he was the musical director for the Phil Everly TV show, Short-Lived. They had Billy Joel on there before he was really famous, and Billy is practicing before. They're doing a sound check, and Warren's job is to make sure everything sounds good, everyone's comfortable. And Warren tells the story, he walks up behind Billy, and Billy's playing a Beethoven piece flawlessly. And Warren said, I turned around, I walked outside, and I contemplated quitting music. I think there was something deep inside him, like I said, that felt like maybe he wasn't doing what he was set to do. He believed very strongly in destiny and luck, as I said before. So there's a lot of times when he would get deep. I said it before, I don't want to be a junior psychologist, but Crystal tells this great story in her book, and she recounted it to me, and we talked about it in length, because this is what led to his intervention. When Werewolves of London blew up and Excitable Boy got to the top 10, oh no, I'm sorry, Excitable Boy got into the top 20, I think, the album, and the Werewolves of London got into the top 20, something like that. It was the biggest hit, as I said. She said, they had a separate room out where they were living in L.A., and he went out there at like 3 in the morning, and he had a cache of guns. He was a big gun guy, which is a great addition to the drinking, the pill popping, and the violent outburst. Add some firearms to this. And he went out to the shed, or wherever that place where he'd write, and she hears, bam, bam. And she runs out there, and he's completely gone. He's staring, and he has a smirk on his face. And he blew 2 holes in the cover, a poster of the cover of Excitable Boy. Famously, he had the artist, the photo was taken by Jimmy Wachtel, Waddy's brother, and I interviewed Jimmy for the book. They retouched that thing 1,000 times because he was very pockmarked. He had, bad skin. And he was so cognizant of that, so vain in a sense. We all are, right? It's a close-up shot, it's his biggest, this is where it's going to be breakout. I think there was some part of him, I see that maneuver. I see that action as being not self-loathing, but what the fuck am I doing here? I got a song on the charts called Werewolves of London in 3 chords. Should I be doing more with my life? Kind of thing. Crystal says it really came from, he was supposed to be the misunderstood artist, right? That was what he stood for. So why am I doing these stupid fucking things then? Why am I doing these things? Why am I running around with a lampshade on my head? Should I be really doing that either? So I think a lot of that stuff balances. It's all in those songs. That's the kind of quicksand I work in this book. I'm not really sure, and I call it quicksand because I think sometimes you can get sucked into that. And again, I don't know if I mentioned her yet, but Bernadette Miller-Vaca, my editor, is my second book with her. She did a fantastic job keeping me from getting too dark and deep with this. I dedicate this book to my beloved mother-in-law, Mary Lou Moore, who was a great artist, painter and sketch artist. And she contracted cancer out of nowhere and died while I was writing The Wind essay. So that was really sort of harrowing for me. I was deep in it. So Bernadette helped me get through those darker times and said, try to stay on course. Stay on course, get the songs across, because it was very easy for me to get pulled into the Warren darkness, the Zevon corner, as we talked about before. So that was a way, I think, to express those thoughts without getting too deep. So I hope I was able to balance that I want it to be, it's a great story of redemption. He has many comebacks in his life and his work, and the songs speak of it, but there is a darkness there that you have to embrace and get in there. And I think because he loved classical music, getting back to your question, because that was something that constantly really did torture him. It was underneath there, bubbling, that maybe he played a little bit with being the pop star. He didn't really embrace it. He didn't hold it like a baby or a porcelain doll. He kind of threw it up in the air and juggled it, and instead of being like, oh, I'm famous now, gotta stay famous. He's just like, hey, I should be doing this and that. When he became famous, he did a ton of interviews, and every interview he said, I'm working on a symphony. This is what I'm doing. I'm into Bartok. I'm into Stravinsky. I'm into Prokofiev. You and I deconstructed those, thanks to you, those little interludes in Bad Luck Streak and Dancing School. And you said, oh, hey, listen, that's, pictures at an exhibition, and this is this. You could see where he's infusing his influences, as opposed to, say, John Lee Hooker, or Elvis Presley, or Bob Dylan, and all those things did inform Warren's music. But, above all, I believe it is the classical.
You say in listening to Warren Zevon songs, we never seem to know if we are looking in a mirror or peering through a window.
Wise ass.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, I think it's, the obvious thing. That's a little ham-handed. But I think it's the most direct way to say, you either see a reflection of yourself in these songs, or you're seeing something beyond your scope, outside your house. He's willing to go there for you. It's like one of those Lewis and Clarkian things. He loved Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception, as I did. This idea of a man gobbling mescaline like a banshee and then writing about it somehow as a scientific experiment. You know, he's going out there because you can't, you know. And then later in life, Jordan told me smartly, his son, you know, when he writes, don't let us get sick, don't let us get old, don't let us get stupid, all right? Just make us be brave. And when he's saying those things, I think he's looking back at surviving. He said, you know, I'm really lucky. I was able to be Jim Morrison and not die in a bathtub at 27. And he had a son and Ariel, his daughter, who her interviews in the book are incredible. Ariel is one of the strongest women I've ever talked to or met. Reminds me so much of my wife, Erin, and just this real, just no nonsense, no bullshit woman who understands she grew up with a, you know, borderline, if not over the line, misogynist, somebody who had serious issues with women and wrote about it. There's always a femme fatale, right? There's always going to be a femme fatale in the Dashiell Hammett and the Raymond Chandler books and the noir style. There's always going to be some woman behind to make everything, wreck everything. And that's in the Warren songs too, and it went into his personal relationships. But, so, you see your foibles, you see your paranoias, you see your fears of death. We all have them, our fears of sickness, our fears of the future, that we think that something else is pulling us. You know, there's some other thing that controls everything. You know, it's outside of our control. That control is a myth. You know, he dedicated an entire album to that, Transfer City. Splendid Isolation, one of his great songs. Jordan, I had a hard time tracking Jordan down, so when I finally did, he said, you know, Splendid Isolation is not just a song. Do Not Disturb is the family crest, he said. You know, here's a guy who just, you know, went inside, but then, you know, he allowed the songs to let you inside. So it's a mirror in the sense you see yourself in those songs sometimes, or you see what you could be, but also it's a window into some different world that you do not dare to tread. And I think like Heart of Darkness, like, you know, Conrad's Heart of Darkness, or Hunter Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, or Armies of the Night, Mailer, or, you know, Sun Also Rises. You know, there are people who go there too, you know, and that's why, again, the writer in me is inspired by somebody who's willing to go there, and then you read about it, and then you go, oh yeah, I get it. Yeah, it's a nice place to visit, but I don't want to live there, you know.
Warren was an integral, if not maybe commercially successful, part of that 70s Southern California music scene that you talk about. That included the Eagles and Jackson Browne, Linda Ronstadt. What were those relationships like? Did they write songs together?
Oh yeah. Well, he wrote one song with J.D. Souther later on when he was holed up in Philadelphia in his real dark period. But in the early days, J.D. would just show up with Don Henley and Glenn Frey and Linda Ronstadt and Kim Carnes and Jorge Calderon, and Jackson Browne. And the list is long. I mean, there's like something like 37 or 39 people. You know, the Mick Fleetwood and the bass player there, who's escaping me.
McVie.
Yes. Play on Werewolves of London. Nobody knows that. You know, these guys just showed up and they played on it. Rick Marotta, great drummer. Bob Glaub, you know, bass player. REM backs him for an entire record. People came to Warren. He was like a beacon, you know. He was like Muhammad's Radio, or you know, as he writes in Muhammad's Radio. I wanted, before we finish, I definitely want to quote his famous inner rhyme, which so delicious. I was up all night listening to his drum, waiting for the righteous who might just come. Rhyming might just with righteous is as good as it gets. And not only are they not going to come or maybe come, they might come, which is great for a gospel type of style. But anyway, getting back to what you were asked, his relationship was quirky with these people. He was never accepted inside of it. I think it was Jimmy Wachtel or maybe Danny Goldberg who said he was kind of like a Zelig, a Bert Stein, who traveled with him for years. Said he was like Zelig, you know, he's always on the outside. He belonged but didn't really belong. But that's why people dug him. You know, they didn't really feel like they were, hey, what could you do for me kind of thing. They wanted to do stuff for Warren. But those songs, listen, Linda Ronstadt's covers of his songs, famously she recorded 4. Hasten Down the Wind, which he named a record on, that came out weeks before or after his first release. Muhammad's Radio, she recorded Carmelita, and one other song, I forget, Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me. Her version is I heard her version first, actually. By the way, women recorded his stuff beautifully. Jill Sibyl recorded Don't Let Us Get Sick. Stevie Nicks did Reconsider Me. Chrissie Hynde. A couple of years ago, there was ironically a vodka ad with Werewolves of London, sung by a woman. A lot of women recorded his songs beautifully, but Linda Ronstadt did it first, and she was great. And Jackson Browne, to his credit, who brought him back from Europe and said, we got to record this guy's song. He went to all his friends, said, we got to record David Crosby and all these, David Geffen, we got to record these songs, you know. And Linda, when she first met Warren, said she thought he was a psychopath. But she understood implicitly the subtext of those songs. When she sings Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me, which is the ultimate femme fatale song, and I dedicate an essay to it. When she sings, you know, she lift me up and threw me down. Please don't hurt me, mama, which she sings in the song. She sings, he lift me up and says, and the man says, please don't hurt me, mama. She switches it around beautifully. She changes the gender, and then she changes the pathos of the song, the humor of the song. She sees it almost as a feminist shout out. She changes it. So these people understood Warren, and the relationship was quirky. It was respectful. I think there were times when he felt, hey, how come the Eagles are selling? I'll give you a perfect example. He writes, I keep going back to it, but he writes Desperados Under the Eaves. It's the subtext of that song, the symbolism of that song is the hotel as a trap. He's listening to the air conditioner hum. He's trapped. It's all he can do. He's picturing the outdoors, you know, in this air conditioner, this cheap hotel, wringing his hands. The Eagles, Don Henley and Glenn Frey specifically, sing on that song. Not 2 months later, they release Hotel California, their masterpiece. The single becomes huge to this day, one of the quintessential California songs. That song sells millions. Does anybody know what Desperados Under the Eaves is? No. Did that kick him in the ass a little bit? Did it tweak him? Sure. You'd have to be a robot not to feel that. But I don't think it really. But it just goes to show you, nobody was around Warren for 10 minutes without going, holy shit, that's a fucking good idea. Yeah. So, but all the Lindsey Buckingham. Waddy told me that might be in the book. He introduced Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, who had just recorded Buckingham and Nicks, to Mick Fleetwood. Mick Fleetwood heard the Buckingham Nicks album at LA Sound. Said, whoa, this is a cool. The guy was just playing it, the engineer, to show that Mick Fleetwood, you have to record your next record here. He heard it and thought it was great. So he called up Lindsey Buckingham and asked him if he wanted to join Fleetwood Mac. Lindsey calls up Waddy while he's recording, I think, Excitable Boy. Maybe before that, during when he was in on the sessions for the first Zevon. And Lindsey and Stevie Nicks show up and they sing background on a couple of songs. Mohammed's Radio is the best one. And Waddy says, what the fuck are you doing? You got to join Fleetwood Mac. Lindsey's like, but I want to do my own. He's like, no. So while everyone's hanging out, playing songs and getting high with Warren, Fleetwood Mac goes from this beat-down English blues band going nowhere to one of the biggest bands of the 1970s and 80s. So Zevon was like this beacon that everyone came to, and he understood that, and he played it well. He was no dummy, Warren. He didn't play like the outsider guy and just got drunk and said, everyone loves me because I'm so dark and deep. No, he understood. He played it well. Just not well enough to become hugely famous, I think.
What was the reception that you received when you approached Warren's family and his friends for the material and the interviews and the information that you'd need to write this book?
It was great because everybody understood what I said at the very beginning of this thing. More people need to know about this. People need to celebrate. Thank you for doing it. That's what I got. Thank you. Even people I fought with throughout the whole thing. Even people who gave me shit or wondered what the hell was going to happen. Some people just completely embraced it and loved it every second. Jorge was amazing. When I finally got Jordan, he was great. Jordan gave me all the songs. And I'm dedicating, by the way, I'm giving 10% of all my royalty profits to asbestos awareness because Warren had mesothelioma and I always mispronounce that. Mesothelioma, is that right? Yeah. And so Jordan is one of the spokespeople for it. So I'm donating 10% of my money to that. Jordan was great. He gave me all of everything he owned gratis. When I called up Larry Klein for 50% of a song he wrote, no problem, man. Paul Muldoon, no problem, man. Carl Heiss, I never met these people, no problem. When I got them on the phone, I interviewed Crystal and Ariel, his widow and his only daughter, who is Crystal's daughter, who live in Vermont now. Crystal is selling, and you should go check it out on Facebook, whatever. She's selling Warren's extensive library with little photographs and notes in it for people. She's auctioning off for money for a artist enclave in Vermont. I got them both on a Sunday morning, and the three of us just talked. I got Crystal first and then Ariel. We just talked for hours just about Warren, growing up with him, dealing with him. The alcohol, the storming out, the ripping a banister off the wall, the writing accidentally like a martyr while watching a game show, the visiting him in some dark, going to movies with him. And they all talked very deeply about banal things and deep things. Bert Stein, I mentioned, who was in Hawaii to dry Warren out or get him out of L.A., they stayed in this shitty hotel, he said, in Hawaii that was half underwater that Warren insisted on staying with because it was authentic. And then they go on a ride out to the mountains with this waitress who says, we're going to break into a... First it starts off with, hey, let's go hang out at my friend's cabin. Halfway up there, so he doesn't know we're coming, so we're going to jump through the window. And that's when Bert says, Joe Smith, who owns Warner Brothers, he's going to ask us, we're going to need some lawyers and money. And then, of course, Warren goes guns. They run back there. They write the whole thing up on a napkin. He still has it. Lent me the napkin. Took photographs. Got to see that. Waddy. What a great guy Waddy is. Honest, strong. I don't want to leave anybody out. Everybody I interviewed for this book, I know I'm going to. George Gruhl was a sweetheart. Big, burly, crazy guy who partied. He said, I'm no saint. I'm not going to sell... Warren and I went crazy, went to the edge. It was George who told me that the famous photograph for Paul Nelson's piece that I told you, The Resurrection and Crack Up of Warren Zevon, where he's being pulled by Annie Leibovitz. Leibovitz famously was a big drinker and drug user, and Warren is... The story in the magazine is about Warren cleaning up, and he's off on a binge with her, partying. So all these people had no problem telling me the true stories. They really opened up to me. And like I said, Jorge's story of his final hours, his final days, his final weeks recording The Wind was just so moving. And again, I hope it comes across in the text. I hope these essays speak to how much these people loved him. They all embraced it. They told me, thank you so much for doing it. And maybe it kept me going during the times when things got pretty rough with this. But not only from the work, but like I said, with my mother-in-law dying during it, and then, of course, the battles I had with several people unnamed now, and also just getting the rights to the songs. Warren's publishing's a mess. Everything about Warren is not easy. So I got to physically write about a guy who was all over the map, and then I got to live it, which was very, and this is why I'm drinking gin during this, let me tell you. It was not an easy run. Anything else?
We're good.